Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield audio podcast.
I want to talk to you just for a few minutes about the experience that I have had since my book, The Mormonizing of America, was released. Many of you have asked about this. There's a lot of interest in what my experience is. And I think it really reveals a lot about where our society is, what the attitudes towards Mormons are, etc. And I think the most striking thing to me, and it's something that I had not expected, is that as I've been talking about Mormonism and, writing op-eds and appearing on television, all that kind of thing, my Mormon friends, and I call them that because they genuinely are, but the people in the world, I mean by that both Americans who are Mormons, whom I consider to be friends, and then my more specific people I actually know, play racquetball with, eat dinner with, kind of Mormon friends, have been very respectful of the book. It was actually said in a Mormon publication that this is the fairest of the books that is critical of us, which I thought was a very great way to say it. That I was kind, that I was fair, and yet, of course, in the book, as much as I extol their accomplishments and business acumen and civic virtues, of course, I'm not with Mormons, don't believe that it's fundamentally true, much as I respect them. What's interesting is that the main criticism that I have received, and I'm not even sure it's intended to be a criticism, but the main response that I have gotten, other than positive things and critical, just normal academic reviews of my book, is that I'm not a quote-unquote believer. If you go on some of the Mormon websites, they'll discuss the book. They're for the most part kind. They're for the most part respectful. And then they'll say, but of course, he's not, a believer. And I would see that at first and go, what? I thought perhaps they were questioning my Christianity. I thought when I first saw this in print that it was maybe Christians saying, well, this guy's not a believer, so what does he have to say about another religion? Or then I realized maybe it was Mormons saying, well, he's a secular guy. Maybe they didn't know that I'm a Christian, that I pastored for 2 decades, etc. And then I realized they were saying, I'm not a Mormon. And that's really important in Mormonism because like many religions, Mormons do not expect their faith to make sense until you have a confirmation from their Heavenly Father. Christianity, Judaism believe that you can understand their tenets, that you can understand its history, that there's a certain rational base, and then, yes, you'll have to be given the gift of faith to go beyond. With Mormonism, it's almost entirely a God-given, a Heavenly Father-given ability to believe. There's very little academic base, intellectual base, so to speak, for the faith in terms of its spiritual claims, in terms of the claims it makes about history. So that I was not a believer was really critical. They would say what they had to say. They would review the book, talk about what they agreed and disagreed with, and they'd say, but of course he's not a believer. And that was a real stunner for me because, I've read almost everything that Christopher Hitchens has written, at least in a book. Of course, he's passed away. Raging atheist. I never questioned his ability to question my faith because he wasn't a believer. I knew he didn't understand some things because he hadn't been, what shall I call it, touched by grace. That's not an arrogant statement. It's just, you've either experienced some things or you haven't. I don't know what it's like for him to be British or to have gone to Oxford or Cambridge. But my point is that my Mormon friends questioned even the legitimacy of me writing about their faith because I wasn't, quote, a believer. And I think that's one of their problems, quite frankly. I'm not just hurt or, firing back. I think one of the problems is that Mormons don't believe outsiders really have much to say that's constructive. I believe that you should hear truth in the mouth of your enemies. I believe that your critics can be the unpaid guardians of your soul. I think that even, for example, the famous atheist Christopher Hitchens made me a better Christian because I read his criticisms, I researched, I studied, I drilled down deeper into my faith, and I became a better Christian. I wish that my Mormon friends would welcome the same process. Another thing that I've experienced during the time of this release that really is interesting, the Gallup poll that I've cited a couple of times says, it reports that 63% of Americans say they know little to nothing about Mormonism. And one of my experiences in the last months has been when I teach about Mormonism, when I just share the basic doctrines of the faith, and I'm not ragingly critical, I'm just describing what they believe, people are stunned. I think most Americans are convinced, have been taught, that Mormonism is a branch of Christianity. And of course, while Mormons claim to be Christians, and I'm not picking a fight here while they say they are Christians. Of course, they came into the world saying that the Christianity that existed was wrong, and they rewrote every major traditional Christian doctrine. So when Protestants and Mormons both claim to be Christians, they're having an argument over what Christian is. That's really what's going on. The bottom line, though, is that most Americans have no idea about this. They have no idea about what Mormons believe. They might know a few Bill Maher kinds of things about sacred garments and temple rituals, but they don't know anything else. And so the utter shock, I mean shock among atheists, shock among Christians, shock among even people who were raised in Mormonism and sort of went away from it as adults, stunned by what Mormons believe. And the reason, I think, is that Mormonism has received acceptance in American society primarily through celebrity and not by an airing and digesting of its doctrines. It's primarily been famous Mormons that have won acceptance, and I make that case in the book, and not an airing of their doctrines. And so that's a real critical issue, a very, very important issue. And then another thing that has just absolutely stunned me, and I've mentioned this before, is the way that many evangelical leaders have gone silent on the issue of Mormonism. I'm certainly not contending that they should rage against it. That's not my point. My point is that if Mr. Romney were not a Mormon, my evangelical friends would have continued their normal criticisms of Mormonism, their normal alarms about Mormonism, their normal seminars and teaching and what they would call debunking of Mormonism. All that's gone silent, and the reason is everyone wants to defeat Obama. Everyone wants to get this man out of the White House, at least, of course, on the right and the evangelical world. So the silence on Mormonism is deafening, so to speak, and I think it's not going to serve us well. I think there's a way you can say, hey, he's closer to where I am politically than Mr. Obama. I'm going to vote for him, but I think there are some dangers in his faith, and I think we should talk about them. I think there's a balanced way to do this without just compromising and going completely silent on the subject. And I think that's a very, very important topic. I want to say as I close that the thing that has been also astonishing to me in this process, and I mean this as the deepest compliment, is that my Mormon friends have been so gracious. They've read the book. They've interacted with me. They've told me what they don't agree with. They've told me where I got a few facts wrong, and we'll change them in the next edition. That happens in everybody's book all the time. It certainly happens in mine. I'm human. Nothing major, just a spelling or something like that, a first name, or maybe a debated date within Mormonism or something. But they've been so gracious, so welcoming, reading it, interacting with it. The Deseret News Service and Publishing Company out in Salt Lake City, Utah, has reviewed it and talked about it and interacted with it, and they've been unbelievably kind. We don't share a common approach. They do question whether I should even be speaking about Mormonism. They're stunned that a non-believer, quote unquote, would write about it, but they've been unbelievably kind, and for that, I think they deserve great credit.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, a frequent faith and culture commentator on Fox and CNN, and a blogger for a number of leading online news services. His groundbreaking books on faith and American society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Faith of Barack Obama, The Mormonizing of America, and the soon-to-be-released Lincoln's Battle with God. You can learn more about Stephen at www.mansfieldgroup.com and connect with him on Facebook and on Twitter under the name Mansfield Writes. The Stephen Mansfield podcast is produced by Isaac Darnell for Chartwell Literary Group.